Great.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Laird, Secretary for Natural Resources, but I want to take some of my testimony and address some of the concerns in general that have come up in the discussions, because they're very much on point for the issues that face the Resources Agency and the projects that might exist in them, because this initiative would have a substantial impact on our ability to fund and maintain infrastructure projects, and the uncertainty with regard to litigation or how it operates causes us considerable concern. And to repeat the 2 points from the legislative analyst and then tuck everything under it, the legislative analyst was really clear in his analysis that the fiscal effects of the measure on state and local governments are subject to substantial uncertainty. And that uncertainty is how certain interpretations are made, and those interpretations will substantially affect the decisions we make and some of the circumstances that are already in evidence for resources projects. Secondly, the legislative analyst said that there was not a definition for the projects, what a project was, which has come up already. And it really matters to us whether it can include larger systems of improvements constructed over time. And I'll talk about the State Water Project and the maintenance that is due in that. But just to take a few specific points on these and walk through them with regard to resources. The first one is that the administration supports, historically, projects where the beneficiary pays. This has been a long-term state position. If you look at the California Water Project that was enacted in the 1960s and constructed in the 60s and 70s, 96% of the costs were paid by the beneficiaries or the ratepayers and 4% by the general fund. If you look at the one dam that was constructed directly by the state, the Oroville Dam and Reservoir, 97% of the cost was paid by the ratepayers, 3% from the general fund. So under this initiative, if a project were done by revenue bonds where the rates paid by the beneficiaries were to pay for the project, all voters would vote on that. You could be in a position where statewide voters give favorable direction on a project that didn't pass among those that would have to pay for it. It removes the beneficiary pays piece of the revenue bonds from the equation. Now, there was a question raised, and believe me, I am sorry that Assemblymember Eggman has left, because I would love to engage her on all her points very clearly. But she said, well, why shouldn't everybody vote on it? That's what general obligation bonds are for, because everybody pays, everybody should vote. Revenue bonds are where the beneficiaries pay, not everybody. If somebody in Modoc County is not affected by the State Water Project in any way and would not pay for the State Water Project in any way, they really don't have much business making that decision for other people. And 25 million people in California benefit from state water. 14 million do not. You would move everybody into a voting position on that, regardless of whether you're going to pay and a beneficiary. And to just get to one specific point, because it's why shouldn't people have a right to vote, the San Jose Mercury News, in an editorial on this ballot measure, drew a distinction. They are not a fan of the governor's water project, but they are even bigger not a fan of this ballot measure, and they say the two things should not be confused. They were very clear on that. And secondly, revenue bonds give the state the ability to manage in a crisis. This is exactly what the chair was referring to. He was in legislative leadership at the time of the energy crisis, and revenue bonds were issued as part of the emergency response to that crisis. They went to the Department of Water Resources in the Resources Agency. They were given the authority in 2001 to assist in the mitigation. They entered into energy contracts to stabilize the energy market, and then issued revenue bonds to be paid back by the investor-owned utilities where that investment was made for the distressed condition.
She is.
Yeah, here she is. She was listening. She was listening.
She heard you.
That happened to Dr. Pan in a hearing last week, so it's not unique. And so as of 2003, the Department of Water Resources issued $11.27 billion of revenue bonds to repay the advances by the general fund from the energy crisis. $5.28 billion of those energy bonds are still outstanding. The department recovers the costs of the bonds from investor-owned utility ratepayers when they pay their rates. Not everybody in the state, from the people that benefited from that pay it as part of their rates. So in short, if the same energy crisis were to happen under this ballot measure and the state grid depended on rapid state action that must take place in a matter of days, either a massive budget cut would have had to been made to the state general fund, or the state would have been hampered in being able to respond. It would have been one of those choices. And this could severely constrain crisis management, where you might have to respond in days or weeks in the future. Now, the proponent indicated in his testimony that, this wouldn't stop any project. It could be done in a timely manner. Well, not in this case. That could not have happened. And then there's the second piece of this that it came up in different things, which is the refinancing of these bonds. These bonds have been refinanced 5 times for a better rate. And the proponent said, oh, well, it's no big deal. It'd just be embedded in the ballot measure and you'd be able to do it. Well, this was not subject to that measure. There are still $5 billion of outstanding bonds. If they are to be refinanced, and that's determined a project under whatever litigation might take a while, first, you might lose the low rate to refinance because of the litigation. But secondly, if it turns out that's a project, you would have to go to the voters. It would not be timely with regard to the refinancing. That's a very clear problem. And third, I think there's the question of repair and maintenance for the state water project. The estimated capital finance needs in the aggregate right now, for maintenance and improvements, some of the things that Senator Bell was referring to in his questions, totals $3.4 billion. They include projects leading to the Kern Water Bank, for the North Bay Aqueduct that goes over to Napa County and places on the way to Napa County. It leads to a San Bernardino tunnel intake structure that leads to the distribution system in the San Bernardino area. All those things are part of it. Is that one project? Is everything an individual project? If it's litigated and it's only paid for by the people that benefit from that project, not people statewide, is that an appropriate thing for everybody to vote for? Will this process delay that maintenance? Those are genuine questions, and to say we'll just rely on litigation is not helpful to us. It is not helpful to us exercising that. And in the state water project revenue bond program, new projects, capital repair, their revenue bond sales that typically happen twice a year. They might range from 100 to 300 in recent years. Some are higher. There have been bonds in the billions of dollars. There's a question of how that falls into this, and if it's routine maintenance that is built in the rates for the ratepayers. People are expecting it. That should not be held up by an arbitrary requirement that does not fit it directly. So, to summarize, I think we share the concern that this initiative is not the best public policy. It's poorly constructed against the state's ability to manage in a crisis. There are many unanswered questions that may well, how they're answered, affect our ability to repair and maintain the system. And so we have broad concern on the measure as it is now written.
Thank you so kindly. Yes.
Thank you. And I wasn't listening. I was in other meetings, but
many people certainly called it to my attention that you were inviting me to chat. So I would just want to come back and from what I get, I want to be clear. I am not a proponent of this initiative, but I wholeheartedly represent the Delta and San Joaquin County, and I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to be able to ask the very real questions I think that exist for us, and because the legislature and we have not been offered an arena because the $17 billion water project is going around us, or through us, in my case. It was an opportunity to be able to have the conversation. And when you say ratepayers will pay for that, agencies, yes, the agencies will raise water rates for their ratepayers, potentially raise, as they've been clear about, raise property taxes because it's Prop 13, feel like they can raise. And I don't think people know that. So that is my issue with AB 1713, that will say we shouldn't have the tunnels without a vote of the people so people can be fully informed about it. That is my whole issue on the issue of the initiative, although I thought he did a nice job of explaining it. My issue is simply the $17 billion elephant in the room. And I've received a lot of letters of opposition about there's no other alternative, but we still know this project in particular is not fully authorized. It has not been able to pass environmental reviews. We know Congress and Senator Feinstein is currently working on a plan that offers a couple different alternatives that haven't been thoroughly researched before. So when we say there's no other way to do that, I think that's not true. I think we've been tunnels, no tunnels, and unable to look at anything in the middle. So again, my hope is just that we're able to have a more fully fleshed out dialogue and to be able to come to this committee hearing as I'm going to sit on the Appropriations Committee. I thought it was timely for me to be able to say, let's talk about that $17 billion project that partly this initiative is referring to, although I also, along with everybody else, has been called a liar, liar, pants on fire by Mr. Cortopazzi. So, I mean, it's not like we're close and I'm not working on this initiative. My issue is certainly the issue of the $17 billion initiative or project that wants to go directly through my district, that will upset the entire economy of the Delta, that will destroy an ecosystem, and that the public has not been able to allowed to weigh in on, except in 1982 when they were, and they said no. So that's my issue on this project.
I think, boy, do I want to respond to every piece of that, but this also hearing is not directly about that. So Let me just make a few points clearly. Because first, the voters weighed in 1982 on a project that is completely different. This one is 40% of that. It has had environmental vetting all the way along. There's climate change. The legislature did weigh in and direct this project with dual goals in 2009. It did not go around the universe. There were people at this table earlier that voted for that bill.
Environmental impact reports.
Pardon?
It doesn't have full environmental impact clearance at this point.
Oh, it's not final because we're responding to 10,000 comments, many of which have come from your constituents. And I would say I would expect nothing less than that. And to say it's environmental degrading rather than bog down the hearing, or I would say it's not. With regard to the whole notion about not a drop of water, I would refer you to my op-ed in the Sacramento Bee 2 weeks ago that speaks directly to that point. And
there's a lot of op-eds out there, isn't there?
Well, I'm really aware of that. And the ratepayers, there are cost studies, and there were questions about that earlier. And when it is finalized on the comments, the cost studies will be finalized as well. It's responding to those comments. In the Los Angeles Basin, it's an average on rates of $5 a month increase implemented over a number of years. So that is what the cost study says. So all that is out there. And I think in a fair way, in the thing that I did mention, because the pants of my boss were attacked. I haven't directly been. But the San Jose Mercury News, I pointed out when you're out of the room, did a strong editorial against this ballot measure, and they opposed the governor's project at the same time. They draw a complete distinction between it. They do.
As do I.
They think this is bad public policy, and that's a separate debate.
As do I.
Okay. Please. Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. I'm Amy Costa with the California Department of Finance. In the interest of brevity, I hope to not duplicate comments that the committee's already heard, and I do hope to address several of the points that you've raised. The Department of Finance serves a core function in both the planning and the financing of state infrastructure projects. The State Public Works Board was created by the legislature to oversee the fiscal matters associated with the construction of projects for state agencies. The board is chaired by the Director of Finance. The legislature appropriates those funds for capital outlay projects, and through the review and approval processes, the board ensures that capital outlay projects adhere to the legislature's appropriation intents. The board is also the issuer of lease revenue bonds used to finance capital outlay projects. In addition to the State Public Works Board, the Department of Finance develops the administration's 5-year infrastructure plan, which was referenced earlier today. And the latest plan was submitted to the legislature earlier this year and outlines the governor's proposal for the investment of $55 billion in state infrastructure over the next 5 years. Through the lens of the department's work on infrastructure and planning, we've reviewed the proposed initiative. As previous testimony has indicated, and we would also offer, the proposed initiative is difficult to quantify because several key provisions are murky. And I think some of the discussion has really highlighted that. However, and I believe, Mr. Chair, you referenced this earlier, there is a provision in the initiative that states that it should be construed liberally. And so with that, as one of the lens that we're viewing the proposed language through, that in and of itself would have some broad and far-reaching implications for the financing of future infrastructure projects. There's likely wide-ranging impacts. I think one of the issues that you've raised that is one that we've reviewed as well is that the definition of state, which is offered, includes any agency, department, or JPA that the state is a member of. It's unknown if this would include entities that are recognized in statute, if this would include entities in which the state is a member of the JPA. Again, going back to the provision that it's liberally construed, I think it's reasonable to make an argument that it would include.
That it would include authorized, of which there's 700 JPAs in California. I contacted the JPA Association to look at that, and certainly there's an interpretation that can be made, and even if it could be lost in a case, somebody will sue on it in order to try to do this. That's the bottom line. Somebody will sue, and so all of this stuff will be continually litigated until some years out we'll have adjudication by the United States Supreme Court, if that's the case.
And I know the university, my fellow panelist, Ms. Kim, will talk about the definition of whether or not the University of California falls within this provision. I think that is an issue that we've raised as well for multiple of reasons that were testified to previously, as well as, several of the ex officio members of the regents are state elected officials, including the governor and the lieutenant governor. The other proposed definition that we reviewed within the initiative includes the term project, which we've had extensive conversation about earlier today, for any project financed, owned, operated, or managed by the state. So that in and of itself is a fairly large envelope of projects. But within that definition, they also offer that projects that are physically or geographically proximate. I think that there is a rationale to say that that definition could include state highway projects. Is the entire state highway project considered proximate? I would hazard to guess yes, as well as campus-based projects such as the California State University System or the University of California. Further, as Secretary Laird mentioned in his comments, the projects that are physically joined or connected, again, I believe state highway as well as the state water project could fall within that definition. An example may be a toll road, which is connected to the larger state highway system. Lastly, projects where the state cannot accomplish its stated purpose without the completion of another allegedly separate project. An example that we offer for that is you could include a CAL FIRE fire station. If we were to perform work on one fire station, I think it's reasonable to make the argument that that one fire station cannot perform the stated mission and goal without the help and assist of the other fire stations within the system. Lastly, we believe projects impacted by this initiative will be wide-ranging given the fiscal threshold of $2 billion. The proponents argued, $2 billion is a large project. I would offer that a constitutional amendment is in perpetuity. It seems like a lot of money now. Over time, $2 billion will grow. Additionally, it is adjusted to the Consumer Price Index, and as has been offered, construction costs outpace the CPI. A project cost raised over time and the CPI grows to a lesser extent, more projects will be included under the umbrella of the provisions of this initiative. Over the last 5 years, construction costs have escalated at 9.2% compared to 5.4% for the CPI. Lastly, we would just offer that lease revenue bonds have been utilized for a variety of projects. And it offers another flexible tool for policymakers to address any number of issues. Panelists have offered testimony in emergency or crisis situations. I would also offer there are possibly public policy issues not even yet contemplated that policymakers may want to address with this tool at a future date or time. As the previous panelists have testified and I've outlined, the proposed initiative poses many questions about which particular projects would be subject to its provisions. And this level of uncertainty in the bond market could most certainly drive up costs for future revenue bonds. I think the proponent pretty clearly stated that it is at least anticipated that many of these questions would be subject to court interpretation, and that level of uncertainty in the bond market will drive up costs. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience. Yes, please. Gesundheit. Please.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Hertzberg, Gomez, and members of the committees. My name is Sandra Kim. I'm the Associate Vice President of Finance for the University of California Office of the President. In my role, I'm responsible for the overall management of UC's debt portfolio, reporting directly to the Chief Financial Officer, Nathan Brostrom. I oversee 3 departments within Capital Asset Strategies and Finance, which includes Capital Markets Finance, Capital Programs, and the Office of Loan Programs. The University of California uses debt financing along with campus funds, gifts, and other sources to fund various projects within the university's capital program. UC's debt program utilizes the university's credit vehicles and strong credit ratings to finance projects at an affordable cost of capital for the campuses and medical centers system-wide. The capital program addresses infrastructure deficiencies, seismic and other life safety needs, enrollment, facilities modernization, and program improvements. The university was invited today to participate in today's hearing to offer information related to how the university, as a public land-grant institution constituted as a public trust in Article 9 of the California Constitution, could be impacted by this initiative. I believe my testimony today should not be construed as either supporting or opposing this ballot measure. The authority to adopt a position on a measure resides primarily within the UC Regents. First, I would like to state we will note the perspective being offered today by the attorney for the firm representing the proponents of the measure. The university does have an Office of General Counsel that we rely upon when determining if certain provisions of law do or do not apply to the University of California. At present, it is view of our counsel that the measure may potentially apply to the University of California. I'd like to turn to the applicability of the measure only to projects over $2 billion, and it's been brought up numerous times within the testimony today. To be clear, based on how the university defines a large capital project, we have not to date financed a single project that exceeds $2 billion. However, 2 projects in the past decade have costs exceeding $1 billion associated with them, and depending on the interpretation of the measure's single project language, could indicate that future projects would meet this threshold. One example of a complex capital project with a large cost is a recently completed UCSF Mission Bay Benioff Children's Hospital, Women's and Children's, approved by the Regents in 2010 with a total project cost budgeted at $1.52 billion. Additionally, the university anticipates the need to address several major capital project initiatives related to hospitals within the UC health system. The Alfred E. Alquist Hospital Seismic Act of 1983, subsequently amended by SB 1953, requires that each medical center and other acute care hospitals in California complies with the seismic safety standards specified in the bill by January 1st, 2008. This is subject to extension by OSHPD. If the standards in SB 1953 are not met by the relevant compliance date, a UC medical center could be prohibited from providing inpatient acute care services after 2030 in the portions of its facilities that are not in compliance. In addition, California law currently imposes a separate, more rigorous set of seismic standards for acute care hospitals effective in 2030, commonly known as the 2030 requirements. Because some older UC hospital facilities are not yet complying with these requirements, the UC medical centers are evaluating the capital improvements necessary to ensure compliance by 2030, and in some cases, significant additional capital improvements or work might be necessary prior to this deadline. For instance, the UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento will construct a new facility to meet seismic deadlines related to the forthcoming closure of one of its facilities as required by SB 1953. And to address increased demand for patient care services in the area. This preliminary estimated project cost is in today's dollars, $750 million. Along with this continued SB 1953 mandate, the UCSF Medical Center is also planning to propose construction of its facility at Long Hospital on the Parnassus site, which has inpatient facilities currently in Moffitt Hospital. Current costs are to be estimated, but given the cost of Mission Bay, we could see that cost potentially in excess of $2 billion. San Diego has a similar requirement as Hillcrest site and will require additional capital improvements to meet its 2030 deadline. Given the large dollar amounts of these projects, we are concerned with how the definition of the term single project may be interpreted for the purpose of this initiative. The initiative provides in Section 4 that multiple allegedly separate projects shall be deemed to constitute a single project, and then specifies certain circumstances to describe that more fully, such as separate projects that are physically or geographically proximate to each other, or where one allegedly separate project cannot accomplish its stated purpose without the other.
And Ms. Kim, can I just ask you, do your lawyers at the University of California interpret this could apply to them? You heard that the lawyer for the proponent is opined with clarity of a Supreme Court judge, Chief Judge, that no, it of course doesn't apply, and this is my interpretation. You've also heard me cross-reference other provisions of Prop 13 that countered his view of the Constitution. Our lawyers tell us that this clearly, by virtue of the, he says, now I didn't want to exclude it, but it specifically has exclusions, and it says it's to be liberally construed. My question to you is, have you talked to your lawyers, and if so, do they interpret this as applying to the University of California?
I think they have
concerned.
Interpreted the measure as sufficiently vague to as it may be applicable. So right. The vagueness is the issue here, and we talk about the financial markets and the interpretation of potential litigation. They are concerned that the lack of clarity constitutes an interpretation.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
So we are concerned that under this definition of a single project, an entire campus may be deemed to constitute a single project due to, among other things, the close physical and geographic proximity of its structures. So we have many...
Mr. Laird, would a single project under CEQA, when we look to the idea, the proponents argue that we're going to keep it vague. So the question becomes, where would you find jurisprudentially some guidance in the law over the term project? So we looked at the California Environmental Quality Act. Given the concern that the University of California had, would a campus, in your judgment, in your expertise, certainly historically in this building, I give you great legs for that, and credibility on that, would you think that that's a reasonable interpretation in terms of determining project?
I did have, unfortunately, some experience with the University of California on planning, and their entire planning document, which include their long-range development plan, which included their entire suite of buildings that they expected to build, was very much one project. And
is that the University of California capital plan, which identifies $16.3 billion in proposed capital expenditures?
I believe that's system-wide.
Yeah.
I'm referring to the individual.
Just individual campus.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So under this definition, for instance, a single project, there could be a student housing complex, a laboratory, and a hospital that are physically or geographically proximate on a campus. They could have interdependency functions and could be considered under this initiative as a single project and could reach this $2 billion threshold. Another current project that raises similar issues, similar to that of the UC Medical Centers, is our UC Merced 2020 project, with a budget that is in excess of $1.1 billion. This project expands the campus's physical capacity to accommodate enrollment growth to 10,000 students and has called for in its campus's long-range development plan, adopted by the Regents in 2009. The LRDP not only sets forth the land use plan and principles to guide to 10,000 students by the year 2020, but also for eventual full development of a 25,000 student campus. That is the end of my testimony. I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions?
It's just an interesting commentary on master plans.
Right. And how do you plan and what's going to happen and how do you make that happen?
Is that all at one, or is that the financing make sense to roll out in pieces, or do you?
Well, you can be sure that there'll be people that will litigate that because they always do. It's appropriate. Yes, Senator Bell.